Representative Cassidy, in your bill, this allows for adults to possess under 30 grams of marijuana in Illinois. Is that correct?
Illinois residents, yes. Non-residents would be 15 grams.
For those under 21, are there any penalties?
They're aligned with the penalties for possession, underage possession of alcohol.
And what are those penalties?
There's a civil violation, and if there is a nexus with driving, there is automatic suspension of the license, or revocation, sorry.
Are you aware that the penalty for possession of alcohol by a minor is a Class A misdemeanor, not a civil violation?
No, I'm not.
So it is not the same penalty then for alcohol and cannabis for minors?
The penalty for possession of cannabis in that quantity generally in our law is the civil violation. A juvenile should not be subjected to a greater penalty than an adult.
Do you hold to that same principle with alcohol then? Because we do treat...
This bill is not about that.
Well, we do treat alcohol
But if you
differently.
sponsor that bill, I'd be delighted to co-sponsor it with you.
Well, your representation today and in committee was it was being treated the same as alcohol, and it's not. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Is there anything in this law, if it becomes law, that would require parents of those under 18 to be notified if their minor was found with marijuana?
Not that I'm aware of.
So a minor under 18 found with marijuana would be could be stopped by the police, receive a ticket, which could be paid over the counter at the circuit clerk's office. And
if a minor is in contact with law enforcement, yes, parents are notified.
Are you aware that police interpret that provision when it relates to marijuana, because it's a civil violation, that they do not have any obligation or even ability to notify the parents, because it's a civil violation, not a criminal violation?
They've not brought that concern to me.
We discussed in committee last night the issues with field sobriety testing for DUIs related to marijuana, and you spoke on that yesterday. There is currently not an accepted chemical field sobriety test for marijuana in Illinois. Is that correct?
Admissibility of technology for roadside testing will be determined by the courts in accordance with Illinois Supreme Court Rule 702. Whether the testing platform that Michigan uses, which we discussed last night, passes that standard is up to the courts.
Are you aware of any case currently pending that's going to resolve that issue before January 1st?
No.
So we could have a situation in this state come January 1st where a person could be stopped for a DUI, in fact, a fatal accident, and there would not be a court-admissible field sobriety chemical test. If I'm understanding that correctly, is that accurate?
Just a moment. When we passed the civil enforcement bill that set our DUI standards and enabled departments to use the field sobriety test, the ISP has not begun that process with regard to that. However, according to the state police, they're operational at the Springfield lab in the process of acquiring validation and instrumentation for the Chicago lab with regard to official crime lab toxicology tests.
So those tests you're referring to, are they on blood?
Also, urine tests are admissible.
Urine tests are admissible. Are you aware?
And field sobriety tests are statutorily admissible.
But there is no roadside chemical test that has been accepted by the courts.
We enabled that 2.5 years ago.
And we still don't have it, correct?
The state police informed me that they have not done that.
And the testing with the state police, do you know if they can test at
Representative Windhorst, your time has expired. Representative Severin, do you rise to yield your time to Representative Windhorst?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I yield my time.
Representative Windhorst for an additional 5 minutes.
With regard to the Illinois State Police lab testing, are you aware if they have the capability inside their criminal laboratory to test for the level of THC which is necessary for a conviction in DUIs?
Once again, ISP is operational at the Springfield lab and in the process of acquiring validation instrumentation for the Chicago lab.
Can they test for the level or just the presence? Because those are two important distinctions.
They are fully operational at the Springfield lab.
Let's discuss the use of drug detection dogs. Currently, most, if not all, of the drug detection dogs in Illinois are trained to test for the presence of marijuana. If they alert on a vehicle, that gives the police officer probable cause to search the vehicle. If this becomes law, do you believe that a dog alert for drugs on a vehicle will still be constitutionally valid?
Yes, these dogs can still be used. If a dog indicates on cannabis, we do believe that it'll be probable cause for the officer to conduct a search or extend a Terry stop. We're not changing any laws on what constitutes probable cause or reasonable suspicion. If the dog's indication can be used as probable cause or reasonable suspicion today, it can be used after this bill passes.
What about those canines who don't alert for a presence of a certain drug, just presence of drugs generally, meaning dogs that are trained for opiates, methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana, and they just alert to the presence of one of those substances?
We are not changing any laws on what constitutes probable cause or reasonable suspicion. If the dog's indication can be used as probable cause or reasonable suspicion today, it can be used after this bill passes.
Excellent reading. My question, I guess, is how the courts are going to interpret that.
I can do it again.
Well, I guess I would just say there is a concern that the courts will not interpret that as valid probable cause because of prior court rulings. Now, you were aware we just decriminalized marijuana in 2015 in this state. Is that correct?
Low-level possession, yes.
And what is that level?
10 grams or less.
And to your knowledge, has there been any study conducted about the effectiveness of that policy change in our state?
Define effectiveness.
Well, the number of police stops for marijuana, the number of prosecutions for marijuana, the number of tickets written in lieu of a prosecution for marijuana. Do we have any of those statistics?
I'm aware that the ACLU did do some research on that, but I don't have it available to me at this time.
And again, that law was in effect that gave us greater ability to form field sobriety tests for DUIs, correct?
In that same law, we set the nanogram standard for THC in blood and saliva, and we enabled the use of the field sobriety tests.
And we still do not have that established for field sobriety tests in our state.
To my knowledge, only one department has done a pilot project on it.
And that has not been tested by the courts for admissibility.
I am unaware.
To the bill. The National Academy of Medicine in 2017 issued a 487-page report, The Health Effects of Cannabis and Cannabinoids. The former head of the Centers for Disease Control, Thomas Frieden, said, the conclusions of that report show that marijuana, there's way too little known about it, the potential benefits are unproven, some serious harms are definite, and many serious risks are possible. Among those concerns, which are summarized, cannabis use can negatively affect adolescents and young adults' health and well-being, including their school performance, education level, social lives, future employment, and income. Cannabis use is associated with the development of schizophrenia and other psychoses, loss of reality. The risk is highest for the most frequent users. Heavy cannabis users are more likely to report thoughts of suicide than non-users. The British Journal of Psychiatry, 2018. It is now incontrovertible that heavy use of cannabis increases the risk of psychosis. Of course, association does not prove causation.
Representative Windhorst, your time has expired. Representative Parkhurst, do you wish to yield your time to Representative Windhorst?
Yes, please.
Representative Windhorst for an additional 5 minutes.
Of course, association does not prove causation. However, one by one, alternative explanations have gradually been disproved. Patients do not start using cannabis to self-medicate their psychotic symptoms or side effects of drugs, but rather use it for the same reasons as the rest of the population, principally for its high. The risk of psychosis remains after controlling for personality disorder and use of other drugs. Some overlap between genes carrying susceptibility to schizophrenia and to drug use has been reported, but insufficient to explain more than a fraction of the relationship. A 2010 review of earlier studies by the Schizophrenia Bulletin found that 27% of people with schizophrenia have been diagnosed with cannabis use disorder in their lives. A Swiss study of 265 psychotic patients published in Frontiers of Forensic Psychiatry revealed that young men with psychosis who use cannabis had a 50% chance of becoming violent. A 2013 Italian psychiatric journal examined about 1,600 psychiatric patients in southern Italy and found that cannabis use was associated with a 10-fold increase in violence. A 2012 paper in the Journal of Interpersonal Violence examined a federal survey of more than 9,000 adolescents and found that marijuana use was associated with a doubling of domestic violence. A 2017 paper, The Social Psychiatry and Psychiatric Epidemiology, examined drivers of violence among 6,000 British and Chinese men and found that drug use, and the drug was nearly always being cannabis, translated into a 5-fold or 5-time increase in violence. If we look at 4 states, the first 4 to legalize marijuana. In Colorado, violent crime rose 20%. In Alaska, violent crime rose 30%. In Oregon, violent crime rose 21%. Nationally, at that same time, violent crime only rose 1%. Again, in those 4 states, Colorado, Alaska, Oregon, and Washington, the first 4 to legalize marijuana, murders were up 37%, and aggravated assault was up 25%. Those were far greater than the national increase, and they accounted for differences in population growth. As was said last night in committee, and I'm sure will be said today on the floor, correlation does not prove causation. However, there is sufficient evidence for us to show that there is a connection between the use, particularly heavy use of marijuana, and the increase in violence in society. We can address the social justice concerns that were raised by prior speakers without legalization. We can do it. We need to make that the effort before we jump off and legalize this substance. This is not ready. This legalization is not ready, particularly when it relates to DUI prosecutions. We need to study what occurred from 2015 with our decriminalization. We need to continue scientific study on the use of marijuana, and then we can examine whether legalization is the right policy for our state. I urge a no vote.
Members, we still have many people seeking recognition on this bill. Please try to keep your remarks as concise as possible and within the 5-minute time limit. We will allow you to yield time, but please make an attempt to keep it within the 5-minute time limit so that we can move on with the proceedings for the day. Representative Evans is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the sponsor yield for a couple of questions.
Sponsor indicates that she will yield.
It was kind of odd asking Kelly Cassidy about bills like this because I do believe in you, but I got to be sure on the record. What can you say, or what can you give me to say to people in my community that are concerned about job loss because of many of these companies who do drug testing? What can you say to that?
I'm sorry, I don't.
Job loss due to drug testing. What can you say? What information can you give me to ease their concerns about losing their jobs because of drug testing?
The same zero tolerance policies that are in place now will exist after.
Will this legislation impact that?
This legislation just affirms the existence and the right for employers to have zero tolerance policies. It doesn't change the status quo with regard to the ability to have a zero tolerance policy.
I know there's been a lot of health things mentioned. You know, I'm a cancer survivor, and pain management is an issue for folks throughout this state. What can you say would be the health implications to individuals? Because we call it recreational, but I think it goes deeper than that. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. The ability for folks who may not be able to access a card because of our incredibly restrictive list of conditions would certainly be a health impact. Folks who could manage conditions that aren't currently included in our medical cannabis program is one. Another health impact on our state would be that by bringing this product out of the shadows and into a tested and regulated marketplace, we can ensure that products aren't contaminated with pesticides or mold or heavy metals or rat poisoning, as we saw with synthetic cannabis in Peoria. There would be no need to access synthetic cannabis laced with rat poisoning under a marketplace like this, because you would be able to go to a safe and clean facility and purchase the product, whether you're treating a condition or not. But you could be assured that this was a safe, tested product.
Thank you, Representative Kelly Cassie, and I appreciate your work on this issue and all of the sponsors. To the bill, ladies and gentlemen, I am a black man from the south side of Chicago, and if you go through my communities, it's not an opinion, it's the fact that the war on drugs has ravaged my community. And I've talked to Representative Cassidy about how the war on drugs has personally impacted my own family, how my father, uncles, friends have been victims of the fraudulent war on drugs. And now we sit here with a piece of legislation that is allowing the commercialization, allowing this drug, this thing called cannabis, to be legal. In all of my life, I've seen the impacts and how it's negatively impacted my community. And I asked myself, you know, I have trepidation. I've had trepidation in this process. And we had a governor who stood up and said, I am going to make this legal. And do I jump up and down? No, because all I've seen my entire life is the negative impacts. And I see a sponsor in Kelly Cassidy. If you go through her array of bills, it's been nothing but make the world a better place bill. She's fighting for everybody. So when she gets the bill, it brings me further complexities, because I want to support. I know where Kelly's heart is. I see Christian Mitchell. I see Jahan Gord, my friend, my colleague, and it still gives me trepidation. But then I look at this piece of legislation, and I'm in this NCSL with the sponsor in the Senate, Toy, and we've talked about what every state has done. Absolutely nothing when it comes to equity, absolutely nothing when it comes to criminal justice reform. Each and every state. And me and Toy were sitting in these conferences, I said, every state has done nothing. The liberal state of California has bypassed my community. They refuse to do anything when it comes to legislation. And I look at this board and I see this bill, and as a black man, it gets me emotional. Because finally, the state of Illinois is gonna look at my community and say something. My community is gonna say, we want you to have a piece of the pie. They're gonna look at my brothers, my uncles, my fathers, and say, we want you to have a job, because only thing that's gonna help my community is jobs. We want you to clear your records. We wanna do that. And yesterday, it was, I was just filled with emotion, because finally, there's a piece of legislation that's gonna do that. And I've been here for 7 years, and I've been in politics nearly my entire life with Christian Mitchell. We were kids when we started, and I have never seen a piece of legislation that's gonna address the problems that I have. I was gonna get it.
Representative, your time has expired. Representative Andrade is recognized. Would you like to yield your time to Representative Evans?
Yes.
Representative Evans for an additional
My
5
car
minutes.
and go home and not vote for this bill if there was not real evidence. I don't care about this job. It was no way that I could look my father in the face and the men that I'm going to go back to this weekend and tell them that we didn't do anything when it comes to background. I would have walked out here and take my key. When I look at this legislation and I see real results, and I didn't believe it. It was no way. Because in the years that I've been here, this job is full of false promises. Oh, yeah, we're going to help you out. But we continually get left hanging. And to see this piece of legislation, again, it warms my heart. And I knew it because I know how Kelly Cassidy does things. But it's not a trusting business. And when the governor got up and he was on TV and we're going to do all of these things, I did not believe it. I said, yeah, they're going to talk about it and it'll be watered down. This is real. And what I'm hoping is that when we go back to NCSL and we talk to my colleagues throughout the country, that they use it as a template. It's very few, we always use examples of what other states are doing, and it irritates me because the greatest state in the country is the state of Illinois. And I want Indiana and I want Missouri, because me and my family members in St. Louis that I care about with criminal records, and I want them to get the expungements. I want them to get the opportunity to work. There's no make the world a better place organization that's going to solve the problems in my community, but job opportunities and freeing these workers will, because I've seen it. I haven't seen it in my opinion. I haven't seen it in no study. I've seen it in my own family. When you give a person an opportunity, you open up a window. You change not only communities, but you change generations, because I'm one of those individuals. An opportunity was given to the men before me, and that's why I'm standing here. I thank you, Kelly, and again, I thank everybody that's worked for, and I thank the governor, because I did not trust you, I did not believe you, but I do now, because this is real. And again, and I thank all of my colleagues, because everything I wanted is not in this bill, but I think those are the best pieces of legislation. And even my members on the other side who are conservative, I thank you for giving this a chance, because this means something to my community. This means something to my family. And again, I thank everybody that worked on it, Marshanta. I mean, there's so many across the list. And, I wanted to engage, but it was too emotional. This is so important to me because, again, I've seen what happens when an individual is restricted. I've seen the men who cry when they lose their jobs because they didn't want to put on there that they had a felony conviction. I've seen the young folks who were rejected financial aid because they had a background, because they had a possession of marijuana. And I've seen the destruction that that's caused to generations. I've seen it up close, and it's a devastating view. But now I can be a part of rolling that back because of some people that I work with who I have a stronger trust for. So thank you all. And I not only urge an aye vote, that I hope that we celebrate this bill and that we continue to work for it. I'm a utopian viewing individual. I survived cancer. I believe anything is possible. And I want to continue to make this act better. I want to make sure that, that the communities like mine are positively impacted. And I want to ask the sponsor, but I know she's going to do it anyway. I hope that you continue to work on this issue so that the impacts of our community are positive in every way. So thank you, Kelly Cassidy. Sorry, Jahan, that I didn't believe you, because I sure didn't. And again, thank you all that's worked on this issue, and I'm proud to be a supporter. And I urge an enthusiastic aye vote on this very important issue, this very important business issue, this very important community issue, and this is a generational, life-changing vote that I'm taking. I'm holding back my tears because I'm a grown man, but I want to cry. I'll cry when I get in the car later today. But thank you all, and again, I urge an aye vote.
Chair recognizes Representative DeLuca.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen, to the bill. This issue has been a very important issue to me, and I've spoke out. You know where I stand on it. I think it's just because of the way I was raised, the decisions that I made myself as I was growing up. It's reflected in how I choose to raise my children and hope that they make decisions a certain way as they grow up. And this bill moves in the completely opposite direction of the efforts I'm trying to make as a parent. Telling our children, our young adults, basically that getting stoned is a condoned and acceptable recreational activity. And I just have a real problem with that. And when it comes to this bill, there's a lot to criticize. Some of it has already happened. But no matter how you package this, whether it's revenue or it's criminal justice reform, or it's just saying that people are smoking it anyway, so just give up. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can pretty much guarantee you where we're going to be in 10 years, where we're going to be in 20 years when it comes to this issue. And it's not going to be good. So I want to leave an image. I want to leave an image for you. You see this? This is your brain. There it is, folks. This is your brain on drugs. So today, for my family, for my children, for your families, your children, and especially for African American and Hispanic communities, vote no. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that she will yield.
Representative Cassidy, I would like to add to the legislative record some of the things that we haven't talked about, but also to refute some of the, what I call nonsense that we heard, including wasting eggs that should have been used to make a souffle or something instead of making a ridiculous point that was outdated for 30 years. Representative Cassidy, could you tell us a little bit about the public education that is in this legislation that is going to be meaningful in a way that we have failed to provide our children since the days of the war on drugs with an egg in a pan?
Absolutely. We have been incredibly intentional with regard to the design of the public education component of this bill, because when we set out to do this, our stated goal was to reduce youth access. We know that youth report, 87% of youth report that cannabis is easier to acquire currently than alcohol. And we know, quite frankly, that teens and young adults are capable of making good decisions when provided with good information. The idea that we expect our kids to ace the AP Bio exam but think that putting an egg in a frying pan is going to tell them what it means to take a substance into their body is ludicrous. And so we have formed a vigorous approach to public education that includes a public health advisory task force that was a request of the State Medical Society and Lurie Children's and others that will constantly look at incoming science and make recommendations for how we should approach this, but also looking at the studies and the work that's been done in other states. In Colorado, where youth use has dropped year over year, they make it very, very clear and discuss things like neuroreceptors and addiction pathways and the impact of THC on developing brains. And as a result, they are seeing excellent results. And we want to have that same approach. We want to take it the next step further and make sure that we are constantly vigilant to make sure that this public education campaign is as scientifically accurate and respectful of the ability of teens to make decisions as we can make it.
Thank you, Representative. And a few clarifying questions. As you know, I have a lot of interest and commitment to protecting the medical cannabis program and the medical cannabis patients. My understanding is there are a number of protections in this legislation that protects all privileges and rights for patients that currently exist for the medical cannabis program. Is that right?
Yes.
And as we start to roll out the existing medical cannabis dispensaries and transition them to an adult use program, won't they be required to provide an ample supply and variety of medical products for medical patients the way that they're currently providing right now to protect the supply and protect the patients?
Absolutely. The beauty of the regulatory system that you helped to build that operates our medical program is that these facilities, both the growers and the dispensary operators, know exactly what products are needed for the patient base. And we have put strong language into place to ensure not just the quantity, but the variety and the availability is guaranteed for patients before any adult use sales can be made.
And I know that we're taking kind of a go slow approach in terms of the expansion of potential licenses to make sure we don't have an oversupply, which of course could mean that there's shortages at the beginning. So aren't there protections in there that in the event of a shortage, medical cannabis patients will have priority? Is that right?
Absolutely. Medical patients will always have first priority.
Thank you, Representative. To the bill. To some of the comments earlier, we all recognize that statistics and data can be manipulated. In fact, it is manipulated, and we're selectively choosing to really reinforce a pre-existing notion. Correlation is not causation, as one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle accurately noted. And some of the nonsense studies that we talked about here on the floor, to me, belong more in the onion and not on the House floor. When medical cannabis passed in this chamber 6 years ago, I heard a lot of the same rhetoric. As the state's medical cannabis director to start this program, I heard a lot of doomsday predictions. Violence would increase in Illinois. Drug driving is going to be rampant. Medical cannabis is going to be everywhere for children in schools. Law enforcement's going to be overwhelmed. Cannabis is going to be diverted. And you know what? Literally none of that happened because we did it right. And this bill does it right too. I want to really congratulate my partner in crime, Representative Kelly Cassidy, and all the representatives who worked on this legislation, including the indispensable.
Representative, your time has expired. Representative Costa Howard, would you like to yield your time to Representative Morgan? Representative Morgan for an additional 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate Representative Cassidy and all those who worked on the bill, including indispensable staffers, and really indispensable, Rose Ashby and Chris Lindsay, who put months and months and months of their lives into this bill. I've been working with this outstanding legislator to my right, a woman who I would literally drive off a cliff with if she asked me, long before I even joined this legislature. As the first director of the state's medical cannabis program, I am so impressed with this product that the core tenets of it, core tenets of this bill, reflect the core tenets of what we want as a body and what we want as a state. This legislation is without a doubt the most social equity-focused cannabis legislation ever passed by a state legislature, and will provide a strong foundation for medical cannabis patients for the future. If you believe in criminal justice reform, vote for this bill. If you believe that the war on drugs has decimated our communities and needs to be remedied, vote for this bill. If you are concerned about the damage of the opioid abuse and crisis in our communities throughout the state, vote for this bill. If you want to create new high-paying and strongly trained union jobs, vote for this bill. If you want to expunge hundreds of thousands of low-level drug crime records, vote for this bill. If you want to make history in Illinois and put our neighbor states on notice and set the nation's gold standard on cannabis regulations, vote for this bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was told earlier today that I was a little emotional, so I am a little emotional because this is a personal issue for me. You know, I will talk about my brother who, as a young boy, got arrested and now carries a felony around because he got arrested for marijuana. He's been married 20 years. He's a good, stable family. You know, when I first heard about this bill, I heard words like, we're going to try to recapture, redo, or remake what the war on drugs did to black people in America or in Illinois. Does this bill do that? We also heard words like expungement, that we're going to expunge the 800,000 people who got caught up in the war on drugs. And then the expungement process changed in this bill. So I will, in a later point, ask the sponsor to speak on the record about the intent of this bill. So for people like me who are trying to reconcile, if I'm going to support this bill, you know, we have to learn how the process is. And if you think about this in the last couple of days and how this bill is gone, and I want to thank the sponsor for all that she's done, this is what came out, 610 pages of a Senate amendment that came out the other day. How many of you have read these 610 pages? We have to be clear of what's going to happen when we do this bill, that everything that we say and we give our word on is going to happen in this process. If that's the case, support this bill. You know, we had this bill start off, Senate Bill 7. We had Representative Ammons do House Bill 902. We had House Joint Resolution 3 by Representative Cassidy. And now we're at House Bill 1438 on the Senate amendment to concur. So we have to be sure of what we're doing. Now, will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that she will yield.
Representative Cassidy. We started this, we talked about expunging records, 800,000 records. Can you guarantee me, going forward, no black or brown young man is going to be caught up in the system and have to come back, and we have to redo this legislation to ensure that their rights are protected?
I'm not sure what you're asking about going forward.
Let's deal with expungements.
It does deal with expungements, but it's only retroactive. So I want to make sure we're clear that this is looking at convictions up to this point. The process that exists currently remains in place whereby people could petition for expungement or sealing, but this bill addresses past convictions and arrest records.
Okay. So when we started this process, one of the things that I've talked about throughout this, if our goal was to make sure that the people who are going to benefit off the backs of the black men that have went to prison in this process, this is going to create millionaires. So it's not going to create too many black millionaires. And I talked about putting legislation specifically that will deal with creating black millionaires and businessmen in this process. The Ohio legislation required 15%. Are you aware of the Ohio legislation that passed, that got challenged?
I am. I'm aware that was held unconstitutional.
Well, it was held unconstitutional, but in parts of it, where the Supreme Court came back, the state law required 15% of all licenses to go to businesses majority owned by economically disadvantaged group, and they specifically said African Americans, Indians, or Hispanics. Why wasn't that kind of language put in this bill?
Concerns over the constitutionality of in that case that talked about the need for a disparity study, and that's specifically what we did in this bill, was to put in place as many possible pathways for ensuring equity within the licensing process, and then the hard stop so that there would be a disparity study that would then possibly permit us, if those first steps didn't create those opportunities, as we hope they do, by putting so many points on social equity.
Representative Jones, your time has expired. Representative Mayfield, do you wish to yield your time to Representative Jones? She says that she does. Representative Jones for an additional 5 minutes.
As we create a new industry, where individuals and businesses can profit from the sale of cannabis. We recognize that individuals in certain communities have faced higher levels of arrest and incarceration for violating the prohibition of the sale and possession of cannabis. The Social Equity Applicant Program reconciles this reality by giving additional points to individuals who've been personally impacted by—
Representative, I only have 4 more minutes left, so let's
all right, so where I was talking about the hard stop, after the issuance of licenses in January 2020 and the first issuance of licenses to new market in July 2020, the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer will conduct a disparity study of the market to be completed by March of 2021, which could then allow us to change that set aside.
So quickly, what did that disparity study say about the impact on African Americans and then going forward? And was any of that language in that disparity study put in this bill?
There's not been a disparity study because there is not an adult use marketplace. So we cannot do a disparity study on a market that doesn't exist and impact that market. So that's the intentionality here, is to ensure that we do the steps on the front end that will allow us to take further steps if these steps don't work.
Well, you know, we are the legislator. We can do anything that we want to make a bill as good or bad as we want to. So I would, if you're giving your commitment that going forward, that after we do this for 2 years and it's not working, that those disparity studies will be done and put in here.
You have my word.
And all right.
And it's baked into the bill to do the disparity study. And if there are added steps that we have to take, I am right there with you to take them.
Representative, I want to point to your attention. I got a lot of questions, but I will concisely. So part of your bill goes to community college vocational pilot program. It seems like a lot of language in this bill is waxing over what we should just put in strong language. Some of that waxing over is the social equity piece, when we should just call it like giving black business owners applications. In this piece, you talk about the community college vocational pilot program. You don't specifically mention any of the 48 community colleges in this program. Why aren't any of the colleges specifically named in the program?
The Department of Agriculture and the Community College Board will launch this in eight community colleges.
What are those 8 community colleges?
That's to be determined in conjunction with the Community College Board and the Department of Agriculture.
So community colleges have been admonished by the federal government that they're not supposed to have drugs on their campuses. Will this impact the community college and the administrator who participates in this program? Will they be charged in any way if they participate in this program?
That's up to the community college. You're asking if they'll be impacted by on the federal level, and I don't believe that that's the case.
So no Pell Grants will be impacted?
No.
They won't get a letter saying that you can't have these many students, black students, coming to the...
No.
So part of where we are now is that you've been working on this for 3 years, and we know I have to go back to my community, born and raised in Fort Heights, where only probably 1% of the people come out of Fort Heights. You know, you were asked earlier about, is this going to have more dispensaries as opposed to businesses in the community? You also asked about, you know, how communities are going to do this on a local level. Can you ensure me that if any community takes the steps to have more dispensaries than jobs, is there a limit on the dispensaries that a community can put in the local government?
Each Bureau of Labor Statistics district in the state has a cap on a total number per district. There is a limit on how close together the facilities can be. They can't be less than 1,500 feet apart. And there's an overall cap on total dispensaries statewide, total potential licenses. There's not even a requirement that we have as many as we permit.
To the bill, I will just say that, you know, I am as perplexed as anybody in here about this legislation because how deeply it impacts not only my community. I have to go back to a community like Fort Heights and tell them the advantages and disadvantages of this bill, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. So I will continue to listen to the rest of this debate. I want to thank the sponsor and thank the members who have asked questions about this important piece of legislation.
Chair recognizes Representative Stewart.
Thank you. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor indicates that she will yield.
Thank you. I had a few things that I wanted to get a little bit of clarification on, but I first wanted to say I was a co-sponsor on the resolution that Representative Moylan filed. And I think the purpose of that was to do exactly what was done, was to take some time to make sure concerns and to slow things down. And here we are on the last day, so I think we accomplished slowing down. I talked with Representative Welter. And I was very happy to hear of all the input that was put in and all the different negotiations that went on. I think he and I shared a lot of the same concerns, and in our discussion, it seems to me he was very satisfied with the path that those concerns took. I do just have one detail, though, that I do want to ask about that would be troubling for my community and for a lot of other folks. I do understand that when you originally started talking about this, and I know that this is a years-long process, not just this one session, there was discussion of not allowing for any local taxation because I understand the concern of overtaxation and then not having people go to the legitimate market. But then I understand that that local taxation piece was then put back in, correct?
Yes.
So when I was looking with the information that you shared and when you talked with us, I saw that municipalities can enact a local sales tax of up to 3%, and obviously that's locally determined.
Yes.
And then there's a county level tax that's allowed, if the county so chooses, of up to 0.75% in incorporated areas. But then I saw that there's also a 3% for Cook County. And I don't represent Cook County. I represent Madison County. I represent St. Clair County. People where I live constantly remind me, I don't represent Chicago. And I know that. I don't represent Chicago. I represent a very different part of the state. And I don't think it's fair to my counties. I don't think it's fair for my colleagues in Will County and Lake County and all of the other counties, DuPage County, McHenry County, you name it, to be treated at a different level than Cook County. So I wanted to say to Representative Cassidy that I really appreciate you talking with me about that concern. I appreciate your assurances that you are going to fix that discrepancy.
I am.
That ultimately, every county across the state of Illinois will be allowed, if they so choose, to enact up to the same level of taxation.
That is the intention, absolutely. We are aware of the need for a trailer bill, and that is one of the items. This was a late addition, and my apologies that you were left out, and we will address it.
Thank you very much.
Chair recognizes Representative Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. I have been very torn this whole week of whether I should speak on some of these very contentious issues. On this one, though, I feel like my constituents really want me to have their voice heard. So they've been talking to me, they've been calling me. I've heard from them at the African American churches. I've heard from them calls to my office, at the grocery store, the restaurants. Everywhere I go, I hear about this. So their problem is they don't feel their concerns have been taken seriously, and I agree. The sheriffs have called me. The Sheriff's Association from Colorado has called me. The police tell me that they're going to have serious issues trying to monitor the homegrown, that it can be grown in outbuildings. They said that the Colorado sheriffs have told them there's a rise in the cartel involvement. So at the end of the day, there are just too many unaddressed concerns that perhaps someday, if all these concerns could be figured out and taken seriously, we could take a vote on it. But why it has to be today is beyond me. When I ask questions about Sheriff Association, and then I'm told that there's research on the other side to offset that. Well, that could be true, but those of us who want to believe the Sheriff's Association and our physicians, I feel like my constituents have a right to hear the answers to this. Again, too many unaddressed concerns. An OB doctor came up to me and said, I'm very concerned about the risk to babies and the mothers. Another one said they're concerned about the addiction issues. General practice physicians have told me that they're worried about the brain health. I've had the common citizens concerned, saying, I'm going to be driving down the road with my baby in the back seat, and somebody could be stoned in the car next to me and kill my baby, and everything they do is legal unless they get caught. My sister died because someone was texting and driving and didn't get caught. She was only 70 years old. Unless we can take everybody's concerns seriously, I don't feel that it's fair when we say, this group of people's concerns count and we'll answer them. This group of people's concerns don't agree with how I feel, so they're not going to be answered. They're going to just be blown off and say there's research on the other side to offset it. I agree with what Representative DeLuca said earlier. I raised my children to believe that drugs can mess your life up, and I don't know how they're going to raise their children in the same light if it's legal. I have to stand up for my constituents, and my constituents overwhelmingly have asked me to vote no. And so with that, I also urge a no vote. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Weber. Just a moment, Representative. How about now?
Hello, hello.